The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's been almost a year since one of the most notorious serial killers in Canada was moved from maximum security prison to a medium security facility under provisions of the NDP Liberal so-called justice legislation C-83. This serial killer is infamous for his long string of rapes in Scarborough, the rape, torture, and murder of his sister-in-law, and his rape, torture, and murder of two very young innocent girls from St. Catharines. We all know that his partner in crime, his wife, Carla Homolka, skated with a 10-year sentence, despite actively participating in the crimes, as per the videotape the police had in their possession. This rapist, this serial killer, this monster, is Paul Bernardo. And here let me acknowledge the pain and suffering and the repeated victimization of the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. I cannot imagine the pain that you live with every day. God bless you. Madam Speaker, after Bernardo, that monster, was found guilty of his crimes, the judge correctly sentenced him to life imprisonment as a dangerous offender, meaning he should have stayed locked up in maximum security until he died of old age. But no, to our current government, this woke bunch of MPs that are running our justice system, they decided that Paul Bernardo is the real victim, a nice, fine, misunderstood fellow who deserves medium security. So guess what? They passed a law, Bill C-83, which explicitly tells police, judges, and Corrections Canada to impose the least restrictive measures on a person as possible. In practice, this means that this monster, Paul Bernardo, now lives in a dormitory, has a tennis court, an ice rink for recreation, access to sharp instruments when he gets that urge to murder again, not even close to maximum security. That makes no sense. On June 23rd last year, I asked the Justice Minister in this very House why Paul Bernardo gets such special treatment. You know what his answer was? Well, of course, he didn't answer at all. Instead, one of the Prime Minister's attack dogs got up and said that just because Paul Bernardo is a bad man, it doesn't mean they did anything wrong with their legislation. Yes, you heard me right. The Liberals refusing to take responsibility for their own actions. But don't worry, since the current NDP Liberal government refuses to take responsibility for their own actions, it will be the Conservatives who once again step up to the plate and fix the situation. And what is that fix? Well, this bill, C-351, is a bill introduced par mon grand collègue conservateur du Québec. This legislation fixes the mess by the Liberals in the Corrections and Conditional Release Act. It amends Section 28 of the Act, which currently says, if a person is to be confined in a penitentiary, that service shall take all reasonable steps to ensure that the penitentiary is one that provides them with the least restrictive environment. That's what the Liberals changed it to say. Make it as easy on the convicted criminal as possible. This is why Bernardo is getting all the special treatment. My colleague's bill proposes to change that to say, ensure that the penitentiary is one that provides them with an environment that contains only the necessary restrictions. In other words, only make it easier on a convicted criminal if it's absolutely necessary. This legislation is making a significant fix, changing the words least restrictive environment to environment that contains only the necessary restrictions. While a simple language change, this is a massive policy change. When it comes to crime and what to do with criminals that victimize Canadians, Conservatives, such as myself, my colleague, and our leader, have very different approaches than the NDP Liberal government. Conservatives believe that victims of crimes, those who are innocent, those who are terrorized in their own homes, those who have their cars stolen, those who are mugged in our streets, those who are raped, and those whose family members are murdered, those victims should come first. NDP Liberals have a very different approach than Conservatives to crime. I believe in common sense. If a crime is committed, the criminal needs to answer. The woke NDP Liberal approach is that the criminal is the single most important person in the justice system. They believe, and they have written into law, that the police, prosecutors, judges, jurors, and jailers must take into account diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory when dealing with criminals. They have put into place checklists. Does this criminal have any sort of skin color, racial background, sexual identity, or anything in their background which warrants that criminal to walk away scot-free? If so, let them go. That is the NDP Liberal approach to criminal justice. This woke crowd doesn't care if a criminal has raped a woman, kidnapped a child, or murdered an Indigenous man, because in their mind, that so-called underprivileged criminal is more important than any victim can be. In their topsy-turvy worldview, they actually see those committing the crimes as the people that need to be cared for, while the actual victims continue to suffer over and over again. Senator Kim Pate, appointed by the current Liberal Prime Minister, summed up the Liberal hug-a-thug position quite nicely last year when she addressed the Fredericton City Council. I quote, "Canada's criminal legal system is unjust, discriminatory, and biased against Indigenous people and people of colour." Madam Speaker, I agree. It has been unjust against Indigenous victims of crime like those on the James Smith Cree Nation. The coroner's inquest, which was held in my home riding of Saskatoon West, by the way, was clear on this point. The man who murdered all those Indigenous people on the reserve should have never been released in the first place. But yet folks like Senator Pate don't particularly care about those victims, do they? Instead, they're making excuses for the inexcusable. Senator Pate is one of the many examples of what is absolutely wrong with NDP Liberal justice. Once a crime is committed, the criminal must be punished, period. And let me repeat that for the slow ones over there. Once a crime is committed, the criminal must be punished, period. That's why, Madam Speaker, a common-sense Conservative government will bring in tough-on-crime legislation. We will lock up the criminals. We will stop the crime. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical race theory approaches that lead to hug a thug and repeat offenders will be swept away. Common-sense Conservatives will bring back mandatory minimums. We will crack down on those who sexually exploit our children, those who peddle sexually explicit images of children on the internet. Indeed, my Conservative colleague from North Okanagan-Shuswap brought in his private member's bill C-291 to do this very thing. We will take the issue of women being trafficked into sexual slavery seriously and not laugh it off as sex workers and body positivity as men pay their pimps in order to abuse and demean women. My colleague, the Conservative MP from Peace River Westlock, has introduced legislation in this House to accomplish this. Bill C-308 is an act respecting national strategy to combat human trafficking. And we will ensure that men who commit violence against pregnant women face stiffer sentences. The NDP and Liberals voted to kill this legislation on the justification that beating a pregnant woman senseless is just another form of abortion, almost as if it's a good thing. I would argue that the last thing a civilized country like Canada should do is beat pregnant women and not punish criminals properly for it. I proudly supported the legislation brought forward by my Conservative colleague from Yorkton-Melville, which would have allowed the judge to consider pregnancy as an aggravating factor when sentencing someone who has beaten a pregnant woman. Another example? Why not? Let's contrast, let's juxtapose, let's expose the NDP Liberals' soft-on-crime approach. My Conservative colleague, the MP for Selkirk-Interlake Eastman, has introduced Bill C-296, Respecting Families of Murdered and Brutalized Persons Act, which makes life imprisonment actually life imprisonment. This means if you commit...
Sorry, I have a point of order. The honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The member we've just been raising the issue of false titles. He just used it again. NDP Liberal, Bloc Liberal government. These are false titles. It is a falsehood, and it should not be used in the House of Commons.
Again, these were points of orders that were raised earlier, and as the honourable member knows, there is the Speaker is reviewing the points of orders that were raised, the issues that were raised, and we'll be back to the House in the next few weeks with some recommendations on how to move forward with some of what is being said. At this point, I'm going to allow the honourable member for Montmagny for Saskatoon West to resume his speech. He has 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I know it really annoys the NDP when we talk about this. They need to stop supporting the Liberals if that's what they want. This means that if you commit murder and get a life sentence, you serve a minimum of 25 to 40 years before parole eligibility. Because let's face it, right now the sentences under this current woke system of putting criminals first means letting murderers walk away with very little time served. I'll give you some examples. Many of you recall a few years back when the NDP Liberals made changes to ease up on the sentencing rules. Around that time, Christopher Garnier drugged, raped, and murdered off-duty Halifax police officer Catherine Campbell. He did horrible things to her and spread her body parts around Halifax and, quote, treated her remains as human garbage, according to the judge. As outraged as the judge was, the best he could do was sentence this serial rapist and now murderer to 13.5 years, reduced to only 11 years after time served. Imagine that, 11 years for drugging, raping, murdering, and desecrating the body of a police officer. By the way, the coroner testified that it took Catherine Campbell 6 minutes to die by strangulation after her rape. So that's just 2 years of prison time for every minute he took to kill her, only in Canada, and only in the NDP Liberals' woke version of Canada. Let's talk about Ryland Heavenfire in Calgary. This man only got 4 years for shooting and killing his brother with a gun. The facts are undisputed. I quote, Heavenfire pointed the shotgun he was carrying at his brother and shot him in the face, yet the judge said this man could be rehabilitated. What about punishing Heavenfire for taking the life of his brother? Doesn't his brother's life count even a little bit here? Or is that victim in this story just another piece of human garbage? The scales of justice are represented by an icon of a lady wearing a blindfold. She does not see race. She does not see skin color. She does not see who you pray to. All she cares about is balancing the scales. What is fair to the victims? That is justice. Is 4 years for raising a shotgun, pulling the trigger, and murdering his brother really justice? Conservatives believe that if someone murders someone, then they should be punished for their crime. For those of us with actual common sense, it is not the victims that should be treated like human garbage. Madam Speaker, let me wrap up by saying that I and my Conservative colleagues fully support this legislation in front of us today. We believe in common sense justice. We believe criminals like Paul Bernardo, who were sentenced to maximum security, should not be getting special treatment. They should be in maximum security. We believe in justice for the repeat victims, not coddling repeat criminals. Conservatives believe in protecting families and their homes, not allowing rapists and murderers to roam our streets unpunished. It's time to stop the crime. It's time to bring it home.